Yeah, there's a chance. Chip mentioned it today, and I think people kind of forget when the Eagles drafted Lane Johnson, the original plan was to, start him out at right tackle with the intent on moving him to the left side, as Jason Peters aged and possibly moved on. But Peters has continued to play at such a high level that really hasn't had to be an issue. But Lane certainly has the athleticism to play on the left side. He was projected as a left tackle coming out of college at Oklahoma. So he can play that position. There's no question about it. The fact, though, that he would have to do it with taking very few reps, and as you mentioned, he's got a sprained knee and a bad ankle, it's going to be very difficult. So while Chip mentioned it, and I think that would be the plan if Jason was out for a long-term scenario, I don't think you could speed it up and get it ready for this Sunday.
Yeah, and I know obviously Peters probably wants to play. He seemed like he tried to gut it out last week. But if he gets moved in the middle of the game, do you think that changes the way they go about it? I mean, if Peters starts the game, plays a quarter or so, does that maybe change the way they fix things if he starts that game?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the same scenario would happen as last week, where he played about six snaps, and all of a sudden Matt Tobin had to kick out from right guard to left tackle. Dennis Kelly went in at right guard. I think that would be the same way they would go if it were an in-game issue. And to be honest, I think partially because Lane wasn't able to practice yesterday, he practiced in a limited fashion today. And he plans to play on Sunday, but he's not getting his normal amount of reps during the week. Because of that, I think if Jason Peters isn't able to go, I think Matt Tobin's going to be the left tackle, and I think they're going to keep Lane on the right side, and it's going to be Dennis Kelly at right guard.
What happens? Who is the guy? Who's the extra lineman in this situation? Who would have been the next man up last week had Lane Johnson not been able to continue?
Well, Josh Andrews is the next man up, but on game day, obviously you can do it this way. You're only able to activate 46 people, so the fact that you have to deactivate so many people, and if you have those kinds of injuries, that's when the tight end. In the past, in Atlanta, they've had to use a tight end. Seattle, and in that type of fire alarm situation, it would have to be Brent Selleck, but. Obviously, if Jason isn't ready to go this week and guys are down, then you'll have Josh Andrews out there. And it's not a tremendous scenario to have to keep playing people like Kelly and Tobin and Andrews, but at least they're offensive linemen.
John McMullen. See what I did there? John McMullen is with us here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Check out his stuff right now at 97.3ESPN.com, including his story about the latest Chip Kelly problem. John, can you go a little bit more in depth about what now Chip is facing that could be an issue that not a lot of people maybe are talking about?
Well, I think Bill Davis, spoke about it Tuesday, and he didn't do it on purpose. He's just a defensive coach talking about quarterbacks who are difficult to stop, and he went in depth about the most difficult signal callers to face are the ones who can handle things at the line of scrimmage and who can check out of bad plays into good plays and pretty much be an offensive coordinator on the field and be able to change things at the line of scrimmage. He was obviously talking about Drew Brees, but that speaks to all the great quarterbacks, whether it's Rodgers, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, what have you. They all are able to handle things at the line of scrimmage, and Chip Kelly doesn't allow his quarterback to do that. So while, I don't think Sam Bradford could certainly handle it at the level of a Drew Brees, we will never know because he will never be given the opportunity. And I think that's something that needs to be discussed because we talked about it yesterday on the show a little bit. Who would be the best quarterback to run this offense? You're putting names like Rodgers and Brady and Manning out of the equation because Chip can't utilize their skill sets. And I think that's a problem if you can't utilize what Aaron Rodgers does well.
Yeah, that certainly, and one thing is, too, he's not utilizing what Sam Bradford even does well a lot of times, putting him in this situation where a lot of check down stuff. We saw that Bradford could throw the ball down the field, and it seemed like today that Sam Bradford indicated that that's something that they want to do this week, is take more shots down the field.
Yeah, it's another bad defense, and you have to take advantage of it. And to their credit, they did to a certain degree against the Redskins, and they'll have another opportunity this week against the Saints. And it's a time to sort of gain that confidence we talked about that Sam had been lacking through the first three games, started picking it up a bit and looked a lot better against the Redskins despite the loss. There's another opportunity out there this week because it's another bad defense. And even though we've talked about the struggles at the wide receiver position, there's going to be chances to make plays against the Saints down the field because everybody makes plays against the Saints down the field. And
well,
I think Sam realizes that.
And, John, another thing teams do against the Saints is they run the ball. 123 yards a game. They're one of the worst teams in the league against the run. If you can't run the ball against this team, you might want to rip that part of your playbook out.
Yeah, I mean, basically either or. It's just a bad defense. So you should be able to do what you want, especially if you predicate yourself as an offensive, coach who some have labeled, I'm not going to throw it on Chip's doorstep because he doesn't call himself a genius, but plenty of his accolades have called him a genius. And if you're an offensive genius, you better be able to move the football against the New Orleans Saints. So we understand there's offensive line. We understand there's injury problems, but everybody has injury problems. Look at the tackles Rodgers has been lining up with, Bakhtiari and Don Barclay. We mentioned yesterday how bad Seattle's offensive line is. Certain teams figure out a way to get things done despite injuries, and you have to do that in this league.
John McMullen's with us here from 97.3 ESPN.com. Check out his piece on Chip Kelly and the problems they're having with the offense. Also his piece on Lane Johnson possibly moving over to play left tackle in this game. Another thing, John, that I had wrote about over at the website in three things from the Eagles' loss to Washington, one of which is Zach Ertz. And, I feel like this guy had 15 catches in that game against the Redskins. Same opponent the next year. It's not all that many games later, and it was basically a non-factor. How was he a guy who caught 15 passes for 115 yards in that game and virtually only has, I think he's got 10 catches for less than 200 yards this season?
Well, part of it is how the Eagles have been playing. I don't want to, let Zach off the hook because I think he's the one player, and I've mentioned it in the past, that it's probably the fan base of this team overrates the most. They kind of act like he's Kellen Winslow. He's not proven that to this point. But he does have a significant amount of talent. And the Eagles, basically 85% of the time, they've been using 11 personnel, which is one running back, three receivers, one tight end. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me because in that scenario, obviously Zach is not getting the number of reps that he would in other personnel groupings because you have to get some snaps to Brent Selleck, obviously. And why they insist on having, whether it's Aguilar and Riley Cooper on the field together or whether it's in the past it's been Cooper and Josh Huff, whatever group you want to put at wide receiver, I don't understand why they're getting the majority of the snaps over guys like Ertz and Selleck, and I think that's part of it. But when he's out there, he's got to produce, and it hasn't been that great at this point, and that's really the bottom line.
Yeah, and look, he said today when he was asked about Ertz, and he said, I thought, the injury, I guess, is another thing that we really don't factor in a lot with Ertz. Do you think he's been, in other words, do you think that there is an opportunity, though, for Ertz to be a bigger part of the offense, and is he a guy they're going to have to try to find ways to get the ball to? I mean, 15 catches, 115 yards in one game sounds like a guy who is a weapon.
Yeah, and he should be, and we shouldn't sugarcoat the injury because he did come back very, very quickly. It's generally best case scenario, a 6 to 8 week injury normally, and he was back in just over 4 weeks. So I think there might be something to the fact that he's not at 100% yet. So you can add that into everything. But he's proven in the past, as you mentioned, it's an outlier. But anytime you're able to put up those kinds of numbers in an NFL game, it shows you have, significant receiving ability. I don't think anyone doubts that. But the fact that the Eagles haven't been able to get him the football consistently is troubling, especially because if you look at this team's, chart as receptions, it's Jordan Matthews and it falls off a cliff. It then goes to people like Sproles and Murray and Ertz, but they're only at the 10, 11 catch range, something like that. And then you talk about the other receivers who are down in the single digits. So somebody else has to step up and start catching the football. And Zach Ertz is the most talented of that group that hasn't produced to this point.
Yeah, and John, you talk about injuries, Michael Kendricks, and Hicks has played very well, but I think the one thing they're missing with Kendricks out is the ability to blitz from up the middle, and they only have 6 sacks this year, which is bottom 5 in the league. They were, correct me if I'm wrong, number 2 in the NFL in sacks last year, and I think they're missing Kendricks specifically on those third downs, getting that pressure from up the middle.
Yeah, I mean, he's a very athletic guy. He's obviously a speed-based player, so he can be very disruptive in that part of it. And, I hesitate to use sacks. To me, that's, kind of an outdated statistic because it's just about, getting the quarterback off his spot. For instance, everybody's killing the Eagles' offensive line, and rightfully so for the majority of part, but they've only given up 7 sacks. So, while they only have 6, they've only given up 7. A lot of it is just, forcing the guy to be more uncomfortable, getting him off his spots and rushing it. I think, and I said it pretty much from week 1, no matter what numbers you want to throw out there, this defense, by and large, has played well enough to win on a consistent basis. Can it get better? Yeah, everything can get better.
Agreed. From
that pass rush, as you mentioned, Byron Maxwell's got to get better. We've talked about that a lot. But overall, the unit has played well enough to win with, and that's a very positive direction for Bill Davis because that wasn't the case last year for much of the season.
Well, and it's fair to say the Eagles' biggest asset on offense has become a liability, their pace. I mean, that is what they kind of define themselves by, but it's now becoming a liability, this team, because I described at the beginning of this show, John, that the Eagles have a good, solid defense, but they're making to look average because they're on the field so much. If they're not on the field as much, that's a good defense that can maybe be great at times.
Yeah, I mean, we've constantly talked about this with Chip. He doesn't believe in time of possession. He doesn't believe it's an issue. So far, the defensive players, D'Amico Ryan spoke today after practice, and he towed the line, and he said, hey, if we want to get off the field, we can stop them in 3 plays. It's up to us. So we put it all on the defense. But I'm starting to get that mentality of, if you think about the Ravens when Trent Dilfer was the quarterback and Ray Lewis would just put that group on his back and say, it doesn't matter what the offense does. We're going to shut this team down. I'm starting to hear that mentality with the Eagles, but they're not that type of defense. But they feel they have to do those types of things because of how poorly this offense is performing. And that's just not a recipe for success with this franchise as you look at how they're constructed.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. A lot of other injury issues today that have kind of popped up here as it seems like there's constantly something going on over there. But Byron Maxwell did not participate either. And I guess as that continues to go on, there's got to be some more concern that maybe he won't be able to go. If that's the case, what happens in the secondary?
Yeah, I don't think he is. It's still early in the week, but from everything I've been hearing, I mean, the guy can't run. And if you can't run, you can't play cornerback in this league. So unless something drastically changes from now until Sunday, I think it's more likely than not Byron Maxwell is not going to play. And in that type of scenario, you would think Eric Rowe would be the next man up simply because E.J. Biggers is probably not the size and have the length that the Eagles want on the outside. So it would be, time to throw the rookie in the pool, so to speak, and see if he can swim. And To be honest, after watching him the last 2 weeks, I have a lot more confidence that he'll be able to hold up, certainly than before when he looked lost. He's really come on in the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, and him and Hicks as well. Hicks is another guy who has played well, but he gives, he's a little different player than Kendricks is. But you wonder if D'Amico Ryans can continue to hold up before Kendricks can get back. What's the depth look like? If Ryans cannot, play a full game, he's another guy you have to have a little bit concerned about, because I'm sure that he's probably a little banged up.
Yeah, he is, and I think that's the bigger concern, because Jordan Hicks has played very well, as you mentioned. He's held up. He's done everything and more that they possibly could have asked, and you could argue that he's been more productive than Kendricks was or Kiko Alonso was in their, short stints before they got injured. So they haven't lost much, and that's a surprise with him. But
right.
Where they've lost it is D'Amico Ryans is supposed to be on a pitch count, as Bill Davis calls it. And he's an older player, obviously. He's coming off his second Achilles injury. They don't want him out there for a significant number of snaps, and that's where that three-man rotation came in. So the fact that you don't have both Kendricks and Alonso at this point really hurts that aspect of it, and you do have to watch D'Amico very closely, because I still don't think he's at 100% after the injury from last season.
John has his national coverage at todayspigskin.com. John, I want to ask you about some reports out there that the NFL is considering dropping the preseason from 4 games down to 3. I mean, I guess anything getting rid of any preseason games is a positive.
Yeah, it is, and we would all love it to be down to 2, but there's revenue issues, and obviously all that comes into play, because even though they're preseason games, they still charge regular season prices, and that's the biggest issue. And by and large, teams tie it in. So if you buy season tickets, you have to buy those preseason games, whether you want to or don't. And coaches and players, they don't want it, but it's part of that bargaining process. What are you going to give up in return? Are you going to play more regular season games? Are you going to add a team on each side into the playoffs? And all of that's coming into play, and that's what they're doing at the meetings in New York, obviously, this week. The big news today was that they extended the international series to 2025, and it's going to go outside the United Kingdom. And obviously Los Angeles is on the docket. Who's going to be playing on the West Coast in the next year or so?
What is some of the league reaction to this Ryan Tannehill stuff, admitting today that he made remarks about the scout team when they were practicing last week in London? I mean, is this adding to why Philbin is gone? I mean, is that just a little footnote to the whole situation? It seems like the Philbin era in Miami just filled with big problems that you wonder if Joe Philbin will get another shot to coach in the NFL after all of the stuff it seemed like he had out of control or let spiral out of control in Miami.
Yeah, you can never say never, but I would lean towards the guy's not going to get another chance to be a head coach simply because he showed, basically from early in his tenure there, he's just not a leader, and some people are and some people aren't, and you just saw the way he handled his business, and he didn't come across as an NFL head coach, and that kind of showed itself time and time again. And it's obviously a locker room that was out of control, dating back to the bullying scandal and Richie Incognito and Jonathan Martin. The Dolphins probably should have moved on from at that point, made a mistake, and brought him back. And you see the change that Dan Campbell's trying to bring in. It's just trying to change the culture, and he's an old Bill Parcells guy. He's a former tight end. He's a tough guy, and he's immediately breaking out the Oklahoma drill and just trying to say this is, a new sheriff's in town and things are going to be different. But it's hard to change because the players know there's the interim tag on there, and most of them are going to realize, hey, this guy's not going to be around. I don't have to, do everything he says because we're just going to have another coach. So right now, Miami's one of those teams that it's just until they start steering in the right direction, get a concrete plan with their next head coach 100%, they're going to have issues.
All right, we'll also be keeping our eye the rest of the week on Greg Hardy down in Dallas, the New York Giants, looking to make it 2 in a row for them as they obviously. It's very interesting stuff for this week in the NFC East. You got Washington going down to Atlanta to play. So Philadelphia dead last right now in the East, but a lot of interesting matchups in the NFC East. We'll focus on those on tomorrow's show. John McMullen, 24/7 over at 97.3 ESPN.com. Thanks, John.
Hey, thanks, Mike.